Hi everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for being here with me today. We are going to be talking about the rest of Harry and Meghan's Nigeria trip. So if you missed the video where I talked about the first day and the first outfit, I will link it for you here. Coming up later in the week, we have a fashion edition and more reactions to the Nigeria trip following. But before we get into day 2 and 3 of this trip, we have some news about Archewell that we have to talk about first. Briefly, the Attorney General of California has found and declared Archewell delinquent. They haven't filed their required annual report, and they haven't paid their required registration fees, an annual fee that these sorts of charities must pay. So it not only means that they haven't been following the rules and regulations required to run and maintain this charity, but they also have consequences for continuing operations. As of now, the time of filming this, Archewell cannot collect another cent of donations and cannot give out another cent of donations until further notice. According to this news article, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's charity foundation, Archewell, has been declared delinquent and ordered to stop raising or spending money. They let the official registration fees for their charity lapse since at least the beginning of May, according to an official letter from California's Attorney General, Rob Bonta. The document states that Archewell has been listed as delinquent with the Registry of Charities and Fundraisers for failing to submit its annual report and its registration fees. An organization that is listed as delinquent is not in good standing and is prohibited from engaging in conduct for which registration is required, including soliciting or dispersing charitable funds. Archewell now has to submit records to show why its payment is late and pay late fees. Sources for Archewell claimed early in the day that they have filed for an extension and that they had sent a check for their renewal fees, but it had not been received by the Attorney General's office, and that they have sent a new and replacement check. Now, regardless of if this is just a brief accounting error, something that wasn't even Archewell's fault, and a check really did get lost in the mail, or if it's something else going on, it doesn't really matter the specifics of the issue per se, because no matter how understandable an error may or may not be, this just looks super bad. To have this in the press is very bad for Harry and Meghan and their little faux royal tour that they just went on, because their tour has been punctuated by this really bad looking piece of news here. A lot of people are not surprised by this because Harry and Meghan have clearly not been running Archewell in a completely legitimate sort of a manner at all times. There's been a lot of things about it that has people raising their eyebrows as it is. So this doesn't necessarily come as a huge surprise to those who have followed it closely. You'd think they'd be being very careful to keep everything in order and above board. These sorts of registration fees and things like that that are ongoing expenses, generally speaking, people tend to have either prepaid or paid long in advance or some sort of an automatic situation set up so that these sorts of issues do not happen. At the very least, it indicates an irresponsible handling of their accounting department at Archewell. But on the other hand, it does lend itself to this issue that they have had with Archewell, which is this constant high turnover of employees, difficulty keeping people, inexperienced people taking on roles that they aren't necessarily suited to or don't have a good background in, therefore don't really know what they're doing, including Harry and Meghan, and the sorts of cutting corners that we've seen Harry and Meghan do a lot of the time. This comes at particularly bad timing, especially on the heels of this Nigeria trip and their announcement that Archewell will be the ones to fund this mental health aid of sorts to youth in Nigeria alongside UNESCO charity. It was really vague, the declaration that they made that they were going to be participating in some sort of an expansion alongside this established charity in the area. So we're not exactly sure what they're doing or to what extent Archewell will be involved in this project. As it stands right now today, Archewell can already not uphold this promise that they made just a couple of days ago, because they have allowed their charity to become delinquent. It's shady and it just looks horrible. But we will see how it all plays out. Perhaps it is a quick fix and was a simple, honest mistake, but perhaps it's indicative of these bigger problems we have seen going on with Archewell and Harry and Meghan. But now let's get back to the Nigeria trip. On day 2, Harry and Meghan began the day watching a game of seated volleyball. The Meg had two major blunders on this outing. She and Harry were gifted a scarf made from the colors of the Nigerian flag, and it was a very beautiful scarf. Harry kept his on up until the point that he joined in the volleyball game, but Meghan took hers off shortly thereafter. And so these pictures here of her having it in her lap rather than on just make it look kind of ungrateful. It's a little bit rude to the host to not just go ahead and wear the gift for the visit. It was understandable for Harry to take it off because he was going to go play volleyball, but Meg does not have the same excuse, so her taking it off was really quite disrespectful and unfortunate. It was also another missed opportunity we've become very accustomed to, that she did not wear Invictus gear. It seems anytime she has the chance to wear Invictus gear and show support for her husband's big project, she skips it, and she has literally not once worn an Invictus polo or Invictus top or anything like that, and this would have been a perfect opportunity for it. She could have easily had a lightweight white polo or t-shirt and some sneakers, some trainers, something simple and athletic in its vibe, but instead she wore this. We'll talk more about the outfit on Friday, but it was definitely unfortunate to not see her really supporting the branding that she could have, help gain publicity for Invictus, and to keep it focused in the press. The messaging of this trip being allegedly about Invictus, it really would have been helpful and strategic to wear the Invictus shirt. Harry did. The next day they were in Lagos and attended several events, and at one point Prince Harry gave a speech of sorts, which was a little cringe. He called those gathered his in-laws during his speech. He says, "I'll skip the protocol because at this point we're all family." Well, the second part of it was fine, but this whole skipping protocol because we're family and this is my in-laws was a little cringy. Some people find this approach a really great way to connect with the listeners. And I think in some settings, and when done in the right way, personalizing something and speaking about a connection you have with the community you're speaking with is an extremely valuable tactic when it comes to making a speech, for example, or just speaking in general, public speaking. However, when it's sort of reaching like this is, it risks coming across disingenuous. These people who he was speaking to are technically strangers. He's spent but a couple of hours with this group of people, and at this point, not even 72 hours in the country. They are not his in-laws. And saying that we're all family and you're my in-laws really kind of devalues the word family and in-laws. It implies a deep connection that they simply have not had the time to develop. So it comes across strange in this scenario. If he had, for example, been working with these people for a number of years and has made several trips back to this group, then that would become a lot closer of a connection. And you might say something in a speech like, "This community here has become like a family to me." But this is not that. These are people who he just met, who he has not been around or involved with for any amount of time at all. So it really gave a sort of out of touch impression, and it felt a lot more towards the pandering side of things than anything else, and it just felt cringy. The day before this was one of Meghan's biggest events of the trip. She co-hosted the Women in Leadership panel in Nigeria with a media executive and the World Trade Organization Director General. And what she said during this panel was probably even more cringe than what Prince Harry said. That she was grateful for the welcome to the country and then added "my country" to the end of that. And I personally find this a bit odd, a bit awkward. She has never been there before, and yes, her heritage is from there, but it's certainly far from her country. For goodness sakes, saying the UK is her country would make more sense than Nigeria, just given the fact that she married a prince from United Kingdom and lived there for some degree of time. Now, that would be in some sort of alternate universe in which she did not clearly despise every second of that experience and talk so much nonsense and lie about it to no end. But you get my point. I, for example, have a good percentage of Irish and Italian. I wouldn't go to Italy or Ireland and say that I am in my country. That just doesn't make sense. It's a bit weird. Again, it's sort of reaching. It's sort of taking that, trying to build a connection and draw parallels. It's sort of taking it too far to where then it starts to be like, hold on, what are you even talking about? Later in the panel, Meghan Markle made the same mistakes she's made time and time again. The conversation then shifted to the challenges of balancing motherhood with building careers. And when Meghan Markle was asked for advice on this subject, this is a quote from her. She says, "I love being a mom. I love being a mom." She says it twice. And then she recounted a story from when she was an actress before she met Harry. So this is super weird. When I was on season 1 of Suits, so that was a long time ago. Now, I know the show is having a resurgence, but that was a long time ago. So she's mentioning how the show is popular at this time on Netflix, bringing it back to herself, giving us a pointless detail that felt a little bit more like a sort of awkward flex. She's no longer involved in the show. It was kind of a weird detail to throw in there. But she says, let's say maybe a decade ago, and Bonnie Hammer, who runs NBC Universal, was a huge mentor, remains a huge mentor to me. And I remember having the good fortune at the time that she invited me to have breakfast. And I thought this was just the biggest deal in the world. And I asked her that exact question. I said, how do you find the balance? And she said, you don't. You'll never find the balance. And this was before I was married. This was before I had children. This is before all the things in my life that have certainly had a plot twist, Meghan said with a smile. So I found this story to be pretty odd to say for a lot of reasons. First off, it delivers absolutely no value to the question. It doesn't answer the question at all. She never goes on to explain any tips or tricks or advice on how to balance a career and motherhood at all. She delivers this wilting word salad, brought no value to the conversation. For women who do value motherhood, for example, more than a career, but have to work to help support their families, really could have taken away something helpful from her answering that question in a more meaningful way or just answering it at all. But she didn't give any helpful advice. She just talked about how she had breakfast with somebody important one time. It's kind of like name dropping. It seemed very much another sort of attempt to flex in a way of like, look at what I used to do or who I used to know, or I got to go to breakfast with this important person one time. It's not answering the question. These people get no value from hearing that she asked someone else who told her you'll never find the balance. That's not telling us what she thinks, and it's not telling us how to help find balance. And I would disagree. You can always find some degree of balance in these sorts of things. So this was another women in leadership panel, similar to the South by Southwest panel, which she did. And she similarly delivered minimal value there. Panels of this sort are almost always, without a doubt, briefed ahead of time. They want the speakers to be prepared. They want the listeners to get the most out of it. So springing random questions on the speakers is not advantageous to the panel in general. They want you to know at least some of the questions so that you can be prepared to answer them in a meaningful manner. Of course, follow-up questions or Q&As towards the end of these sorts of panels, those are unpredictable or are simply following up on something you said, getting more detail on it. But for the big talking points throughout a panel like this, you do know ahead of time what's going to be asked and where the conversation is going to go. What is the point of this? What are the key talking points going to be? So there's really no excuse for Meghan Markle to not have something better to say than tell a story from over a decade ago about some other lady's answer to that question. It's just more pointless stories. Now, on the other hand, the Meg has nannies, assistants, cleaning ladies, all sorts of help. So she probably doesn't have anywhere near the same level of challenges that these listeners had or that most people have. When it comes to finding a balance between work and being a mother, somebody who doesn't have to worry about cleaning the house and cooking every meal and running all the errands has a massive advantage and isn't exactly the best person to ask about striking that balance. So in fairness to the situation, Meg probably wasn't going to deliver or be capable of delivering any sort of helpful advice from actual experience. because she herself does not have a similar experience to those who are listening. But that leads us to the question of why was the Meg there at all on such a panel anyway? What was the point of having her there, and what is the connection that she has to women in leadership in general when she's not really in much of a leadership position as it is? Furthermore, this trip was booked as Invictus, so how does this tie into Invictus at all? If it was just Archewell and the Meg's charitable endeavors were part of this trip, then why didn't she bring with her value, solutions, something helpful to offer this group? Maybe even resources that can help these ladies. A woman in leadership panel is, generally speaking, a good thing to do. Women have very different approaches, challenges, and dynamics when in leadership roles and in workplaces in general. When someone high profile like Meghan Markle joins a panel like this, or pays to put one on like she did South by Southwest, or hosts a panel on any subject, for example, any high profile person on a panel of any nature, the news outlets are going to report almost exclusively on what that high profile person says during the panel than anybody else on the panel at all. They will be overshadowed and outshined simply because somebody who's not known to the public isn't going to get the clicks that a famous or well-known person might. So that means the high profile person really needs to deliver. They need to make the most out of their mic time. And they do that by sticking to specific, helpful, and impactful talking points. Things that actually will help to bring solutions forward or move the conversation or the cause along in progress. Sadly, what has happened to the Meg each time is that she brings it back to herself every time she has the chance to speak. She offers personal anecdotes far too often. These are things that don't deliver value to the listeners or to those reading about it in the press because they are irrelevant and do not actually demonstrate any sort of new idea, concept, solution, meaningful conversation to change perceptions, none of it. They're always just so plainly vapid and narrow, almost like a niche example, that it's practically meaningless. It makes you wonder why she said these things at all. It seems a lot of the time that she and Harry speak in perceived sound bites, things that they think will look good or sound good in the news headlines in the press, rather than actually thinking about what they're saying and making sure that it's impactful or meaningful or helpful or anything like that. And that's why it comes across so empty, because it literally is. It's not information or words that will move the cause or conversation forward. It's stuff that is designed for or written to make a good headline. And on this occasion, in this panel specifically, her statement of my country and telling people that she has chatty children is what dominated the headlines. Literally over 60% of the headlines from this particular event were about those two things. That she called Nigeria her own country and that her kids are chatty. A couple of them mentioned her statement about how it's important for women to go back to their home to be good role models for girls from the same areas. That was one headline in a very small percentage of the news articles included that. And that was something she said later in the panel, that it's important for women to return home or to wherever they're from to be a role model for young girls or young women in the area. But the majority of the headlines and articles were not reporting on that at all, or it was buried very far down in the article. And even still, even that about the role model thing was still drawing it back to herself and this context where she's thinking that she's returned home to Nigeria and is such a fabulous role model. Regardless of the returning home aspect, whether you agree with that part of it or not, I would argue the Meg is not a very good role model. She hasn't achieved great success in her own private endeavors. She's most well known because of who she married, not because of her own merits, which is not saying that she doesn't have her own talents or things of that nature that she can bring to the table and be a good role model for people, but rather that the things that she has tried to do on her own thus far have not panned out or are rooted in lying about other people and talking about other people who are not bothering her at all, the royal family. So much of what she has done the last few years is just being rude and unkind, manipulating the media, malicious towards the royal family, while all of her independent endeavors, like her podcast, for example, have, unfortunately for her, not been successful. So I'm not sure that I would place her in the category of being a good role model. I think that she could have used that opportunity to turn the conversation towards good role models from Nigeria. If she had done a little research before going on this trip, could have used this question that she was asked to turn the conversation outwards towards Nigerian women who have been very successful and who are good role models for the youth there. And she could have hyped them up and shown not only good knowledge of the community, but support for those women as well. For example, this is a list of very successful Nigerian-born women who have made waves in their industry. These women would be great examples for Meghan Markle to have called out during this portion of the panel as people who she thought were good role models and who were actually from Nigeria themselves. So simply put, it was once again another missed opportunity, something of a theme we have seen unfolding with Harry and Meghan. A missed opportunity to use their platform, or this panel in this instance, for good. And that's the very concept that she failed to grasp when she was a member of the royal family, when she was working with the royal family. You use your platform to boost other causes. You're like a trampoline for other people, for other organizations. Now, for balance, just because you're wealthy or married a herald doesn't make you an expert in anything whatsoever. So understandably, we can't really expect the Meg or anybody else who would be in a similar situation to actually know what to say to maximize their presence on a panel like this. But in this case, she certainly could have hired a couple of experts to consult with to help her know what would be most valuable to say, or to help her decide on some talking points that would be good and meaningful. For example, Women's Studies International Forum ranked Emory University as the #1 most influential institution in women's empowerment research in January 2022. Or the Institute for Women's Policy Research produces research that speaks to women's experiences and challenges, such as this, and has helped shape policy that impacts women's lives. These and other various groups have actual expertise on issues. They have experts on staff. They have research in hand on all things relevant to women in leadership. Surely she or Archewell could have recruited some people to help her formulate actual valuable talking points. Ones that would have a positive impact and help move a conversation along. Ones that would have inspired people or been solution-driven, made a difference in the conversation. If she had done that and stayed on that messaging throughout the trip or throughout this panel and various other panels she's put together, the press would have had no choice but to place that in the headlines. Whatever those sound bites or statements were that she made would have been the headlines, rather than her outfit or these silly comments about my country or chatty children. That's what using your platform for good is. It's saying only the stuff that's important so that that's what hits the headlines. The next day, on Sunday, Meg mentioned that she was missing her children because it was Mother's Day. I do think that it was good that she acknowledged that it was Mother's Day, because it would have been kind of awkward if she just ignored it altogether. However, she went on to say that it feels right being in the motherland or something of that nature. I'm not going to add my opinion in on this, but many people had the reaction to this comment that it doesn't seem fully genuine. Because Meghan Markle, in some people's eyes, has distanced herself from her heritage up until this point. She marked herself as Caucasian, for example, on various applications, her driver's license, what makes some people find these sorts of comments to be disingenuous. But regardless of that, I do think it's another example of just kind of reaching, taking it maybe a tad too far, where it does come across as pandering, really leaning very, very far into this whole heritage angle to the trip. Regardless of your or my opinion on that take, I will say that it's clear these really grand, sweeping statements repeatedly made by Meghan and occasionally by Harry too, dominated, completely took over the headlines. This is exactly why the royal family is very careful about when and where they share any personal stories or anecdotes on trips like this especially. On an actual royal tour, the royal family avoids talking about themselves at all costs. Instead, they take a much more strategic approach, keeps the headlines and the press focused on the causes, the culture, and the connections that are important rather than personal notes. And this is just more of that same mistake from Harry and Meghan. The fact that every single time they're on a tour or visiting anywhere, they bring it back to themselves so often while simultaneously not delivering hardly any real value and no headlines having anything important said from them that's poignant or demonstrates solutions that are being worked towards or anything like that. It shows what this trip really was all about, which is Harry and Meghan's PR. While this trip was booked as Invictus related, and that was the one thing keeping it just really narrowly allowed and acceptable, now that the trip has come to an end, we must ask, how well did they stay on theme with that? It's important to stay on theme, and in this case, the mission of the trip was allegedly Invictus. It's important to stay on that theme in part because to do good or make progress on something, you do need to stay focused on it. Your messaging needs to be consistent. It's essential to the success of, or the mission of the visit, so to speak. When you do consistently stay on message the whole time, it really drives whatever points you're trying to make home. It allows the headlines to also be channeled into one specific thing. And it's also important for this specific scenario because Meg and Harold are not representing the United Kingdom or anything or anyone official at all. They were invited because Nigeria expressed interest in hosting Invictus in a few years, and that is the narrow area of acceptability in which they were to operate while in a Commonwealth country as private citizens and representatives of Invictus only. This presented a challenge when Harry was inspecting the troops. It was very much outside the realm of what was acceptable for a trip like this. It had nothing to do with Invictus, and it very much took the trip in a category of we're trying to make it look royal. Over half of their engagements were not Invictus related or connected at all. And that really took away from the conversation and publicity towards Invictus, and Nigeria's alleged goal, or we can only assume their goal, was to demonstrate their suitability as a host country for the games in the future. Harry and Meghan adding in all these Archewell things, the women in leadership panel, comments every single occasion about their personal heritage and connection to the event or personal anecdotes. Every single event had some. Their frequent personal comments and dramatic or over-the-top statements were what captured the media headlines, not the Invictus stuff, not Nigeria's progress in charitable networks, which is really sad. If Nigeria thought that this would be a trip, an event that they were contributing financially to, or they were going to get mainstream coverage, would have been valuable in demonstrating not only their interest, but their ability to be considered as contenders to host the Invictus Games down the line, even just to highlight their culture and their military communities. That stuff didn't get highlighted in the press because of Harry and Meghan's approach. From a PR perspective, although the headlines were largely positive, they were micro-focused on the personal elements to the Sussexes' visit. Meg's comments about her heritage took up a huge percentage of the media coverage, which meant less coverage for everything else that was a noble cause. This gives an impression that the Sussexes, and the Meg especially, are self-centered. Whether or not that's true, that is what happened. Taking every opportunity to turn every event and every question and every conversation into a Meghan moment, into a Harry and Meghan moment, means that every headline is steeped in repeating those same talking points. Meghan made another comment about the 43% from her DNA test, which not only overshadowed Nigeria's goals for this visit or hopes for this visit, intentions, but it also overshadowed Harry's Invictus-focused events. The entire trip also has been punctuated by Archewell being declared delinquent and essentially having their operations frozen until further notice. As I said in the previous video on this trip, it can on paper be loosely considered a success in terms of the majority of the media coverage was not critical of them. But that is very easy to achieve if you strike a for-profit exclusive deal for positive coverage only from a private magazine, not a general actual news organization or reporter or journalist who will report objectively. And regardless, when you scratch the surface, this whole trip is really hypocritical and clearly designed to boost the Sussex brand, to look royal, and to get good press for the Meg in particular. For the last few years, Harry has managed to have marginally higher popularity than Meghan Markle. And I think that taking the angle of emphasizing Meghan's heritage and stuff like that was definitely reaching to boost her popularity specifically, and it was at the sacrifice of Harry and Nigeria, unfortunately. But furthermore, more importantly, this trip was also a PR strategy to dominate the search engine results when it comes to Harry and Africa. Now, instead of Africa Parks being the first thing that pops up if you're searching for Harry or Meghan and Africa, it will be this trip for pages and pages and pages. It's a flood the zone or burying technique used in PR with celebrities all the time. And meanwhile, Prince Harry couldn't be bothered to make a pit stop or even mention or address this controversy at all. And to be fair, he probably can't without really stepping into a big, huge mess, but he should be doing something to help solve these issues with Africa Parks and the people who have suffered at the hands of Prince Harry's charities practices in these areas. And beyond that, this trip also provided a lot of footage for the couple. As we have seen them do before, they splice together all these random pictures from events to beef up the image of their brand. Not beefing up any actual output, no. Just the pictures and the Netflix footage. But please leave it in the comments what you think. I would love to hear your reactions on this trip so far in the Archewell charity news. And don't forget to subscribe so you do not miss any of these upcoming videos, and click the like button if you enjoyed today's video. It helps me out so very much. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a very happy day ahead. I'll see you next time. Bye!